Hi, my name is Sarah Yeager, and I am going to be presenting to you the Split Brain in Man study done by Michael Gazzaniga. So, a couple things that we need to go over that actually started this study was before the study of split brain functions in humans, it was known that the brain had two separate entities, the left hemisphere of the brain and the right, and then it was connected by the corpus callosum. And no one knew exactly in what way the corpus callosum connected the two hemispheres and what would happen when you severed it, especially in humans. But previous studies before the actual split brain study in man was done in animals. So I think it was R.W. Sperry that Gazzaniga actually talked about in his paper was one of those people who kind of inspired him to start the study of the split brain in men. And what he did was he studied it in animals. And he actually was able to show the difference in the function of the two separate hemispheres. And the study actually encouraged surgeons to begin performing split brain operations on patients with severe epilepsy because in the split brain in animals, they showed that you could actually sever the corpus callosum and there would be no severe damage and you could still function. So with this information, surgeons were actually encouraged to begin performing these operations. So now that there were starting to be people with surgically split brains, it allowed a researcher, Michael S. Gazzaniga, to begin his study in split brain patients in 1961. And he was able to focus his study on the main question of how does the brain function when the connection of the two hemispheres is severed. So to try and see how the brain functions when the corpus callosum was severed, Gazzaniga began observing 4 different split brain patients, and he was actually observing their responses to specific tests he gave them on a single hemisphere to measure the hemisphere's functionality. And the test that he gave was 2 different tests. One was focused on visual, and then one was focused on the tangible responses. So in the visual test, he recorded patients' responses to visual stimulation, and then in the tangible test, he observed patients recognizing certain objects by touch. So the way that the visual test was performed was that a picture was shown to the patients, and because each eye communicates to one side of the brain, the picture was either shown to the right visual field or the left visual field in order to activate only one hemisphere. And then the patients were made to either identify what the picture was, either read out the words that were shown, or calculate what was maybe shown to them in a picture. And then for the tangible test, that was actually performed by having the researcher place an object in front of the patient's either right or left hand, and the patient's hands were out of view. You can kind of see it in the picture above me, right over here. They can't see the objects, so they have to choose it with either their right or their left hand because it leads to only one of the hemispheres working at a time. And they were able to either identify the object, describe what the object was, or in some cases, patients were made to pick out a certain object just by the touch. And Gazzaniga actually used these 2 types of tests to observe multiple things in the functionality of each hemisphere. So one of the tests that he used was to look at written or oral responses. One of the tests that he used was to observe nonverbal responses. And then after looking at both of the functionings for those, he moved on to testing emotional responses. So the interesting results that Gazzaniga actually found was in the original tests, they were just written and orally made responses. And he found that when it was being performed by the left hemisphere, the tests went extremely more successful than when the right hemisphere was doing it. And actually, when it came to speaking, the tests that were done by the right hemisphere, there was no response. Like they weren't able to actually speak on what was happening, speak on what was being shown to them, speak what was like they were holding in their hands. The right hemisphere was not able to perform linguistically compared to the left hemisphere. So originally they thought that the right hemisphere just was not able to perform, it couldn't function because of the corpus callosum being severed. But once they moved on to the nonverbal test, it actually was found that the right hemisphere could use high functions and get the answers correct. They just couldn't say what it was. So that kind of led to it being realized that the right hemisphere maybe just didn't have the language down. And then, so once they got that down, they realized that both of them functioned pretty high on their own. After that, the last test was used to study their emotional responses. And when it came to studying their emotional responses, it actually was shown that both sides, each hemisphere was able to produce an equal amount of emotion. One of them, the right hemisphere, just couldn't be super verbal about it. So taking all of the results from the test, the results conclude that when the brain is split, the two hemispheres actually can function on their own. They're kind of functioning in their own little brain. It's like you have two brains in your skull. Both of them function separately and at a high level. And then each hemisphere functions as if it was a whole brain with its whole own consciousness. So meaning there actually is two outlets of consciousness in one brain in split brain patients. So this study is actually really important because it has lasting effects. So this source that I found is actually written by Michael Gazzaniga, but 45 years later. And he actually goes to touch the importance of this original study because it inspires future studies on split brain patients all the way from the 70s to the early 2000s. Also, it was a groundbreaking study because it also made a path for future research into neurological studies of hemispheric specialization and other things like that. Kind of confirming the study of the split brain patients being relevant, this source that I have right here, it's a study done in 2007. So actually confirming that this study has not gone away since the original study by Michael Gazzaniga in men. So I just think that it's super important to realize that lasting research is really important. This research has opened up a whole bunch of different opportunities to study split brain patients, but also hemispheric socialization and things like neuroimaging. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.